But today we're going to talk about rock solid principles that you can put to practice in business and life principles.
Welcome to the Win with Glenn video podcast, where Glenn Henderson and special guests will give you the tips, insight, and tools you need to grow, develop your business and career. Go with us as we dive into the best practices and rock solid principles that will elevate you and bring proven success. Now, here's Glenn Henderson.
Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be discussing rock solid principles. It's really foundation for business and best practices that you can put to practice in your life and business. And today with me, Jim Chambers, a friend of mine, is Jim is joining me. That we've talked about business for more than what I like to
Right, a long
admit.
time.
But thank you for joining me.
Welcome.
And Jim. And people talk about best practices, and I talk about principles. Why learn a lesson when you can put principles to practice? It was a conversation I was having with my children one day, and I said, if you learn principles, then you won't have to learn a lesson. If you put principles to practice, then you won't have to learn lessons. And so I thought it would be great if we could talk to the people and give them the principle of learning principles versus having to learn a lesson. And typically, whenever I learned a lesson, it was not good. It was you had to take the pants off or the back, and
Right.
and it was lessons learned. And so let's talk about and share with people what I also characterize as best practices. So you have a principle, and basically, if you put a principle to practice, it would cause you to avoid having to learn a lesson. What are some of the things that you can tell us that in your past that
Yeah, it's the same thing. I think being driven by principles that you believe in and that in many cases are borne out to be absolutely true. This is absolutely true. If you follow this path, then you're not pulled off in other directions or, in business, we get great ideas, right? We get, hey, that's a great idea, and we try it. It doesn't work, and then you learn a lesson.
right.
But if you're driven by proven principles that are universal, they've been around forever, and you do that, then you avoid some of those mistakes that you would do otherwise. Which is, listen, good ideas sometimes have bad outcomes. Right? You can have a good idea,
Right.
put it in practice, and then you suffer for
Right.
it. But if it's a true and tried principle of business, maybe it's customer service, maybe it has to do with marketing, maybe it has to do with management of staff, whatever it is, if you're operating by a set of principles, you're going to avoid some of those normal pitfalls.
Right. That's why I think principles really are siblings to best practices.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you do this, or I would almost like say an algorithm, if you do this, then that.
Yeah,
And it
exactly
also
right.
works in reverse. If
Sure.
you don't do this, then that will happen.
That's
And so some of the
absolutely right.
principles that I think about is a foundational one that I've always put to practice, and it's do to others as you would have them do to you. So here's a practice that if you practice doing to others what you would have them do to you, typically it comes back.
That's
Not in
correct.
not in all cases, but typically it
Well,
will.
you're business owners, we're also customers, right?
Right.
We have to go to the grocery, we have to get our hair done, we have to buy things, we have to, travel, whatever. So if you think that's an ancient principle, do unto others as you want
Right.
to be done, then we have to look at our customer from the standpoint of that's me.
Right.
Right? If I came in here and I was trying to do business with you, I'm doing business with myself. And so you try to think through that. And if you were to practice that, I think an aside to that is it also allows employees to be principle driven.
Right.
As opposed to, well, we just did what we wanted.
Right.
Right?
They'll actually see it. The principles I've learned over these many years, principles, they are painful.
Yes.
Because it takes
Many
discipline.
times they are.
And but lessons are even more painful.
Yes, they are.
And so I've learned. So yes, you have to be disciplined, and in some cases, so just talk about some basic foundational principles of running the business. You have to have P&L. You have to be detail driven. If you aren't, eventually you will be forced
It will
to
catch
be
up to you.
detail driven, and that could end up causing
Exactly
you to.
right. I know sports analogies, are a dime a dozen, but if you, like in football, for example, a tight end runs the pattern over and over and over in practice, right? Until the pattern that he's going to run is in his head and it is genetically, he's going to do it, and the quarterback knows that. Same in basketball. They run plays. The average person looks at a basketball game or a football game, they don't probably recognize that that person ran that play 1,000 times.
Right, right.
A principle, being principle driven is like that for me.
Yeah.
It's like we believe in this principle, we practice it every day over and over and over until it's the natural thing we do. And that's why, the guy throws the ball or he passes the ball and the person's there at the other end to catch it,
Right.
right? Because they've done it over and over. Principle driven means, it's not that we're like robots,
That's right.
right? There's
Right.
still creativity in there, but we've done it. It's so proven that if you do A, you get B.
Right. And someone will share with me that treat food as medicine, or one day medicine will be your food.
Oh, well.
So
You talking to me?
No,
This-
well, but
Yeah, no,
it's
you're
a
right.
principle. So
That's right.
So too frequently, and I talk to people, and I said that if you don't have, so principles is basic discipline, and that's what best
right.
practices are. So the automotive people come together, the big three, as it were, back in the day, the GMs, the Chryslers, the Fords.
Right.
They will all share. This is a principle. These we vetted. We've all practiced these things, and now we all agree. Here's a best practice, and then that best practice also it's a discipline, and we hear that when you talk about professions.
Perfectly,
What is
yes.
your discipline?
Right.
And so, in the context I share with people, even personally, that if you don't have a disciplined life, then eventually you'll be in a hospital living a disciplined life.
Yeah, I had a friend years ago when a friend of mine was trying to help me with my diet, with my exercise and so on. And he said something offhandedly that kind of, it's been with me for 50 years. And he said, you don't put regular gas in a Ferrari, and he was trying to help me.
Right.
He's a dietitian
That's
trying
right.
to help me. He said, you can put anything you want in your body, okay? And just like you can put any kind of gas in your car. But if you have a car that requires high octane gas and you want it to perform correctly to its peak, what it's capable of, you can't go down and put junk gas in it, right?
Right.
You got to put premium gas. You only get one body. And here's the thing about business: sometimes you only get that customer one time.
One time, right?
That they only make that call one time. They only call up and say, "Can I get an appointment?" Or they only walk in one time, and so. Principle driven means it's predictable.
Right.
You're going to get treated in a predictable way that satisfies your need.
Right.
Right.
So with these rock solid principles that we're going to be sharing throughout this series, there's many, but they all have common themes, and
They do.
Some will be garbage in, garbage out,
out.
which you've just shared, and the customer is not always right,
No.
but they are always the
true.
customer.
They're the customer.
And so people need to understand that there's principles. And the other interesting thing I learned about principles is that principles don't care whether you agree with them or not.
They don't care.
As with laws, so I use that analogy, you have the law of gravity. And so you can say, well, I don't agree with it, I don't like it, I'm not going to put it to practice, but nonetheless,
You will obey
it. When that law of gravity kicks in, then the outcomes, and that's what we're trying to do and sharing with people.
And, if you're a business owner, you're someone in business or professional area, here's the great thing about being principle driven, in my view, and that is it takes an enormous amount of pressure off of you.
Right.
When I get on an airplane, when I was flying down here to do this with you, I get on an airplane. I don't know all the dynamics of how this works, right? But I trust these people that they know that pilot knows what they're. One day I was sitting next to a lady and she was just sweating. She was like, I panic. I can hardly fly. And I said, let me tell you something. See those two people up there? They have families. They have homes. They have lives. They don't want to go. They're going to do everything.
Right. They don't want to die.
take care of
Right.
us,
Right.
And she said, I never thought of it like that. I'm like, so they're going to do everything they can to get us down safely. So you and I need to just kick back and relax,
Right.
and rely on the principles of aerodynamics, etc.
That's right. And in the best practice context with principles, I noticed since you spoke of our airlines, and I'm sitting in and watching the pilot. So you have this principle of checking things off,
Checklist.
literally. And so I know we have
Pre-flight.
technology,
Right.
and technology is great, and we
Yeah.
should, and we'll talk about that later on. But the writing things down, checking things off, holding oneself accountable is a rock solid principle
Yes,
that
it is.
everyone should embrace. And I notice even in this day of technology that still a pilot will get a manifest.
Still has it.
They have weight and balance. And thank God they have weight
Yes,
and
they
balance.
do.
And they'll have paper and which is brought to the pilots, and they have to
Taken
actually
back.
initial it.
Right.
And so that's another principle. So we're going to be talking about these types of rock solid principles that you should be putting into practice in your business, that you can internalize and use personally in all of life, that really will make an impact in your life. The best practice where I will say that you could actually, principles and best practices enable you to predict, not always guarantee, but predict the outcome.
A
And
predictable
so
outcome.
that's the wonderful thing about principles. You put them to practice, you don't have to learn a lesson.
You can relax and let that happen.
Right, you're principle driven, and you can rely upon how that will, I will even say, dictate the experience.
Right.
Because I'm no longer having to try new territory. You have other folks who have commiserated or have come together, I should say, and they have shared, this works, we've tried this, now we all agree, here's the best practice. And that's ultimately what excellence was, the precursor perhaps to excellence.
Well, back to our airplane analogy, when you can't see, you have to rely on the instruments. In business, whether it's a small business or a corporation or any kind of organizational entity, principles are like the navigation system in a boat, in an airplane or something. You can't see all of the dangers that are out there,
Right.
but the system sees it. And you know that if you follow that, if you keep your eyes on the screen, you follow you follow what is telling you, the chances of crashing, the chances of danger are minimized. Otherwise, you're just dictated by whatever happens. You're just reacting constantly to changing circumstances, and you can't possibly, as a human being, even as a business, respond to everything.
Right.
So when it comes to customer complaints or satisfaction or quality control, if you're driven by principles, you rely on those principles to guide us forward.
Right.
We're not going to get it always right.
That's right.
I'm
And
100%.
that's the thing that we want to make sure that foundational and everything that we're talking about is that people will fully and truly understand that principles, then they're black and white, but yet they're gray.
Yeah.
Meaning that,
They fluctuate.
yeah, but if you hold true to the principles, they will guide you.
Right.
You use those as your guidepost and your direction, and the principles will eventually get you to some type of predictable outcome. Join us each time that we come with these installments, and we're going to be talking about winning with Glenn in business and in life. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for the Win with Glenn video podcast. Stay connected by following and subscribing to this podcast on these platforms. Join us every week as Glenn and special guests give you the tools you need to grow and have a successful business or career.